Today marks the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. 200 Holocaust survivors, including 13 Canadians, made the trip back for a ceremony to remember the 1.1 million people who were murdered there. The vast majority were Jews killed in the camp's gas chambers or who died from starvation, cold, and disease. The survivors are among the last living who experienced the atrocities firsthand, who were caged in barracks and whose friends and family were murdered. Many didn't want to go back at all to revisit the horrors of Auschwitz, but say they're concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism right across the globe.
Now, Dr. Mengele, when he inspected us, we would have to stand in rows naked and we would be driven to death. But I said I wouldn't go, and I hid under a bed, under the cover, and somehow I saved myself in this way.
Having just listened to that lady's speech, that really upset me. It upset me, despite the fact that I was also in Auschwitz as an 8-year-old girl. I'm blind, I can't look at notes, so what I'm saying comes from the heart, and she will continue now with my speech. She will read it, but I have written it. Yes.
In Auschwitz, I witnessed mass murder. I, as an 8-year-old girl, overheard adult conversation like, "They must have run out of gas, and they are burning people alive."
75 years since the liberation of Auschwitz, obviously a very somber day, a very meaningful day for many people, including my next guest. Jonathan Richler is part of the Jewish community. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
What's your sense of the significance of a day like this, 75 years?
A lot of sense. A lot of things to continuously unpack. I've been to Poland. I've been to several death camps and extermination camps and labor camps, and it never leaves me. Anyone who has been to that part of the world, or to any part of the world that has commemorated or recognized mass extermination from former governments, you never forget these moments, and there are multiple flashbacks in your days.
Interesting the way you describe it, Jonathan, because I was there 20 years ago following Jean Chrétien at the time, and it was an agonizing visit because he was with somebody who was just so emotional, and I remember seeing the glasses and the eyeglasses and the shoes and the luggage, and something, it hits you so hard. How would you describe the feeling you had when you were first there?
The smell. I've been in 2 gas chambers. One that was the most powerful was Majdanek, insofar as that they had 2 separate chambers. One was experimental for different types of gases. The other was Zyklon B, which is the gas that was used to murder millions. The smell itself in the crematorium, which still exists, the scratches in the concrete, which could only be made by fingernails, will never leave me. Now as an older man, when I think about the size of the ovens, which are still in existence, some of them, of course, were blown up to cover their tracks. Yeah. They were so small, and that could only be because the victims were starved for months, if not years, before they finally met their end. They did not have to be too large.
I often hear the phrase, never again, right? And you roll your eyes. But why?
Every time. I think it's hollow. I think it's a facade. Never again. The reason, the impetus for the creation of the United Nations after the liberation of all the camps. Today, the 75th anniversary of the liberation by the Soviet Red Army of Auschwitz. That in itself is a story. But never again was supposed to mean that we would never see a systematic murder of a people. And I can count a half dozen, what we would today call in a sterilized term ethnic cleansing.
The Balkans?
The Balkans, let's talk about Rwanda, Sudan, the always disputed Armenian genocide, how long it's taken our own country to deal with the First Nations peoples and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Never again. Put it this way, there's two things that happen every year that most world leaders and countries love to go to. And these are in very fancy cities. You talk about either climate change or you talk about racism. And everyone signs principled declarations as to make sure that these things never happen. And a continued commitment to making sure that we will educate our populations and stand up for human rights. Let's throw poverty in there as the third junket. If we're going to go with evidence-based policy making and decision processes, it's false. We're still here.
It's a very somber message on this day.
I'm rotted.
I can tell.
But it's moments like this where we have to think about where we go from this point. And yeah, let's take up that torch for the 75th time. Let's take up that torch for the moment for our next generations. Let's try and figure out how we get our future world leaders to absorb information, not take facts and be overwhelmed by the facts themselves, but take the context. We are living in a moment where the living history of the survivors of the genocide of the Holocaust are about to say goodbye. But we have so many more unfortunate survivors. Well, it's fortunate that they are survivors, don't get me wrong, but it's unfortunate that they have to call themselves survivors of so many other genocides. Let's figure it out. Let's talk to these folks. Let's look in the mirror and ask ourselves why.
Right. Well, Jonathan, very serious conversation, but I do appreciate you coming in. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Cheers. All right. Thanks.